Hi, my name is Chana Pederson, and my capstone project is the old Brainerd Foundry. The Brainerd Foundry Company property is located at the intersection of Quincy and South 10th Street in Brainerd, Minnesota. It was in operation from 1925 through 1981. During its 56 years, Brainerd Foundry's smokestacks pumped about 162,000 pounds of toxic metal dust into the air surrounding the foundry and immediate neighborhood. How far does the high levels of toxins reach, and are people and animals at risk? The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency had 640 cubic yards removed from the foundry site. In some spots, lead was found 3 feet deep, so they removed soil 4 feet down. This map shows the location and immediate excavation area and depth. The site was actually in use as a foundry since 1872. There was another foundry called the Parker Topping Foundry Company prior to the old Brainerd Foundry. The damage was going on for 109 years. The foundry casted bronze, brass, and iron parts primarily for the railroad. To make these parts, the foundry melted brass, lead, tin, and other metals, which is what was released into the surrounding neighborhood. Heavy metals from the smokestacks released polychlorinated biphenyl, PCB, arsenic chromium, mercury, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, also known as PAHs, and the main pollutant was lead. The Clean Air Act of 1970 required air filters to be applied to the smokestacks, which greatly reduced the toxic output by 95%. The factory was only in operation 9 more years after the air filters were applied. There are locations known as hot spots located north, south, east, and west of the foundry excavation site where the lead soil concentrations currently exceed the SRV, soil reference value. These hotspot lead levels are several times higher than what is considered safe by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. These spots are not secured, and people or animals who encounter these hotspots are at high risk. The main concern for the Brainerd residents is elevated lead levels in their bloodstreams, which could have long-term health effects. In 1981, the old Brainerd Foundry filed bankruptcy and the Economic Development Administration from the U.S. Department of Commerce took over the property. In 1983, an investigation and cleanup program were put into place. There were concerns of possible soil and water contamination. At first, the investigation took place only on the immediate property, though records showed that contamination reached to the railroad tracks, which is now the Brainerd South Route Bike Trail. Sheds used to exist on the southeast side of the property that belonged to Burlington Northern Railroad. PCB electrical equipment that were in the sheds spilled and leaked onto the property. A cleanup of the contaminants was conducted later that year. PCB's polychlorinated biphenyls are manufactured and can consist of a mixture of up to 207 chlorinated compounds. They are what's called POPs, persistent organic pollutants, and endocrine disruptors. POPs are intentionally produced and made up of toxic chemicals. They are used in agriculture, disease and pest control, industry, manufacturing, and they can also be found in cigarette smoke, car exhaust, trash burning, etc. POPs can bioaccumulate in human and animal fat. Endocrine disruptors can cause cancerous tumors, birth defects, and other developmental disorders. In 1984 through 1986, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency requested that additional soil samples be tested. At that time, it became evident that cleanup would be needed. The Economic Development Association started the demolition of the old Brainerd Foundry and completed it in 1985. The contaminated site was addressed and a minor cleanup project took place in 1986. In 1996, excavation began. There were also 3 monitoring wells installed. 2 wells were placed in a water table and a third was placed in a shallow water zone. 2 rounds of groundwater were sampled from the wells. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency requested that the Economic Development Administration take another round of samples, but the EDA declined those actions. In 2006, soil samples were taken outside of the fenced area of the old foundry and on adjacent properties. The results showed that lead was reading at levels greater than the soil reference value of 300 milligrams per kilogram. This showed in several locations. Besides just lead, arsenic, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons were also identified at higher than the soil reference value as well. In 2008, more samples were taken to try and square off where the contamination was. At this time, they broadened the assessment area. A total of 8 out of 9 study areas tested high levels for arsenic, chromium, mercury, PAHs, and the main contaminant was lead. In 2012, because they still haven't narrowed down the contamination area, they included a 10th place labeled FS, which also showed high levels of lead. In 2013, per request of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, more samples were taken to hopefully narrow down the impacted soil areas. Places such as under the bike trail, under the street, and other places not previously tested. Soil samples were then sent to the Toxicity Characteristic Leaching Procedure, which stands for TCLP. Tier 1 screening SRV risk characterization. What this means is comparing site soil contaminations to Tier 1 SRVs to determine risk that are warranted and call for further action. In other words, more investigating is needed. You will see this in the tables I present. This first map shows the location of where all the samples were taken and how it was broken up into sections. The second map shows lead hotspots based on XRF data. XRF data stands for X-ray fluorescence. XRF can be used to detect metals and other elements in soil and sediment. These hotspots are still currently there at that location. The third map shows lead hotspots based on lab data. There seems to be a vast difference between lab data and XRF data. Either way, I wouldn't play in the soil over there. Would you? This first table shows sample dates and the soil analytical results for SVOCs. SVOCs stand for semi-volatile organic compounds. These can result in asthma, allergies, endocrine and thyroid disruption, fetal and child development delays, and fetal toxicity. The yellow highlighted numbers indicate compounds detected above laboratory reporting limits, meaning a concentration or amount of data required by a specific department or client where specific results must be reported. There are also a few locations where a shaded area is marked, often blue. Those numbers represent compound findings that exceed the MPCA Tier 1 SRV. This is page 1 of 9. This next table shows the analytical results for metals. The yellow highlighted number indicates concentrations that exceed Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Tier 1 SRV. The dark yellow shading indicates lead results that exceed the United States Environmental Protection Agency's maximum concentration for lead. Note that the soil samples with the lead shaded in dark yellow were taken in 2013 and 2014. This is page 1 of 9. How do they remedy this problem? By using excavation and disposal, they bring in heavy construction equipment and carry off the contaminated soil to a designated location where it can be treated. The soil that was taken will be replaced with presumably clean topsoil. This method is fast and cost-effective, but that requires exact data of all location and depths of contamination. If the contaminated soil is saturated and very deep, it may not be able to be removed, and the presence of structures such as buildings and utilities block removal. There is also the option of placing clean soil directly over the top of contaminated soil. This does not require removal and backfill, so it is easier. It will prevent people from encountering the contaminant, but this may be limited due to drainage or runoff. The contaminant is still there, so the site would be have very limited future use. A protective cap could also be used, such as cement, clay, or asphalt. This does not require contaminants to be removed, but it can be expensive. There will need to be future maintenance, and depending on where the location is, it might be a zoning issue or dealing with personal property. Another option is to try and stabilize the soil. Another chemical would be added to the soil at the site, and a soil layer would need to be added on top, so the soil cannot be disturbed and the contaminants are still there. Doesn't seem very effective to me. The final option is to leave it as is, which is called a no action. The Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is required to consider this. In some sites where an excavation was done and the risk has been reduced, a no action will be put into place, which I believe is what has happened here. Heavy metals do not degrade or lose their toxicity over time. Whatever is left at the location will continue to be there in the soil and vegetation. The spots where there is no grass is the most volatile. These areas will kick up toxins that can be inhaled. According to the World Health Organization, there are 13 heavy metals that can have significant impact on human health, which are arsenic, cadmium, cobalt, chromium, copper, mercury, manganese, nickel, lead, tin, and titanium. Several of these have made it onto the list of heavy metals found at the old Brainerd Foundry site. My main concern is for the people who frequent the space. My daughter and I have moved here 3 years ago, and we have rode our bikes up and down this trail. We have picked raspberries here and ate them. Of course, this was before I discovered this. I can guarantee that we are not going to be doing that again. I would like to think that signs should be posted in that general area to inform people of the soil and the risk of playing there. This is my opinion. I can tell you I would want to know.